Hey guys, what's up? We have a great story based on a post from r/WritingPrompts. Today's prompt is: you're a homeless veteran, who's been sold as an exotic pet to aliens by the CIA in exchange for technology. You climb the dark galactic ladder from the fighting pits to becoming a warlord controlling hundreds of systems. One day you decide to return home and exact your revenge with your fleet. Begin story. The steady pinging of the alarm began, accompanied by the gentle warming of the lights. My eyes slid open on automatic. This had been my routine for years, after all. I was used to it. Ever since that day. I rose, pushing myself upright, and sat perched on the edge of my bunk. I was motionless, perfectly still, but the excitement thrummed right under my skin. Today had come at last. Finally. I reached for my uniform, the well-worn red and gold I'd put on so many times. If I closed my eyes, I could still see it. Still see the concrete under my hands and knees, filthy and almost blackened. I could smell the fear in the air, recognize it as mine. My arm slid through one of the sleeves. The fabric was rough against my skin. I didn't mind. The stuff would take a plough's knife cut without so much as fraying. That was worth a little discomfort. He laughed. Laughed in my face, as I shivered and quaked and tried to keep from pissing myself. I could still remember the glee in his eyes. He'd pulled one over on our extraterrestrial guests. He was sure of it. And my new keepers had loomed in, closer and closer until they filled my vision with their carapaced, leathery bulk. Assessing me. One after another, I pulled the buttons on my jacket shut. The sleep cleared from my mind, fading bit by bit as the familiar action woke me up. The agent behind me had nodded. Said something to the alien. Said ... something. I was too far gone at that point. Too lost, buried in too many memories and too many chemicals. But I saw the crate the alien set down between itself and the agent who had pulled up beside me on the dingy street. And then the alien took my arm in its meaty grasp, pulling. There was no resisting. Even if I'd been the man I was 5 years before, even if I was in my fighting prime and ready to go, I'd have struggled. My fingers were rock steady as I did up the last of the clasps, pulling the suit's high collar closed. The trip to their world was a blessing, in its own way. It was long, and it wasn't like I could find anything to keep my high going while I was locked in a crate. All that I could do was sit. And think. And prepare myself for whatever was coming. By the time we landed, by the time I was dumped out unceremoniously and jammed into their sham of an auction, I was ready. I was pissed. And no matter what they threw at me, I was totally and completely convinced that I'd get past it. Because I could still see the face of the CIA agent as he laughed, staring down at his box of goodies as I was dragged away. I reached out, entirely myself and entirely awake, and took the pistol in my hand. It was the last piece of my uniform, both an affectation and an integral part of myself. The arena had been hard. Harder than hard. Impossible. No one had expected me to survive the first round. But I was determined, and the universe loves an underdog. I survived the first round. And the next. And the next. I could see it happening. I watched as I was traded from owner to owner, my value rising with every iteration. I'd heard the rumors, known the different fates that a fighting slave could wind up trapped in. And I'd made a deal, once I wound up in the right hands. I didn't like to think about the things I'd had to do, to earn my freedom. The people I'd had to kill for him. The bits of my humanity I'd sliced off and sold, piece after piece. But I could still see that man. Laughing. The door to my chambers slid open at my approach, soundless and smooth. I strode out, my head held high. It had been a different game, once I had that first taste of freedom. Once I had agency. I'd always been on the military path on Earth. That much hadn't changed, but I didn't mind. I could use that. The aliens I passed stiffened, saluting at my approach. I spared them a nod, dragging my eyes across them in turn. 100 different beings from 100 different worlds. I'd been to each of them, taking and taking and taking until there was nothing left. I could name each of them, if I cared to. I didn't. I only had one thing on my mind, that day. The last door swished open, leaving the open wall bridge ahead. Stars stared back at me from every direction. My officers turned. Some smiled, as they saw me. Some just stared. I didn't mind, each of them had served well, and that was all I asked. One of them stepped forward, coming right to my side as I leaned against a console and began to tap out my commands. "Is something wrong, sir?" he said. I shook my head, staring at the lines of data playing out in front of me. It had taken years, 1,000 conquerings, and 1,000 dead ends. Just the opposite, Shem. "Something's good." "Oh?" he said. His tone was just the right deferential mix, guarded and eager, all in one. He'd been a good a second. I nodded slowly. "We have a new target." The numbers were locked in my mind, memorized from the instant I'd found the dataship. They were too precious to forget. I hadn't spent all those years finding the way home just to forget the route. "Oh?" Chen said, stammering out a reply like that single word was all he could say. I hardly noticed. My mind was already a dozen steps ahead. Distantly, I could hear him calling commands, readying the fleet's other ships. It was all right there. The pain, the spinning of my head, the grin on Agent Mattison's damn face. I'd seared it into my memories just to be sure of it. He wouldn't be grinning when I showed up on his doorstep, my army in tow. Maybe the goodies he'd traded me for would protect him. Maybe not. A blue orb spun to life, just a tiny blue dot hanging over the holographic display. Chen leaned closer, his black-on-black eyes wide. I stood away, feeling the world gently tilt under my feet. It had been years. Seeing it again, and like this. I was ready. "Let's get moving," I said. /r/inner eye. That's it for today's stories. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons below. We are posting new content daily. See you next time.